Ben Saunders, welcome to the podcast, man. I'm pumped to have you here, man. Thank you so much for taking your time.
Thanks for having me, Stu. It's great to see you.
Absolutely, man. So, what I would kind of love to kick this thing off with is if you could give people kind of just an inside look as far as like what did life look like for little Ben as you were growing up? Because obviously you've taken a crazy path in life. So, what was life like when you were just a little kid running around?
Yeah, man. In some ways, I'm English. You can probably tell. I'm in the UK at the moment.
Yeah.
And in some ways, my childhood was pretty idyllic. Like I have a younger brother, 3 years younger than me. We grew up in the southwest UK, a county called Devon, which is beautiful countryside. So he and I were outdoors all the time. We lived on the edge of this tiny village, middle of nowhere, and yeah, it was like literally running around, climbing trees, swimming in the river, like just. So in some ways, idyllic and outdoors a lot, which you can probably tell had a pretty crucial bearing on my trajectory since then. But in other ways, quite challenging. So my mum and my dad broke up when I was very young. I was five and a half. My dad, my biological father, was an orphan, so grew up in a home. Never knew his parents. Never found his parents. So I had no idea where the family tree went. No idea where I'm from. And there was a theory. He died last year, so we never figured this out. But there was a theory that he might have been one of a number of kids that were left behind by US or Canadian pilots, World War II, who were stationed in the UK and were either shot down and killed over the continent, Europe, or flew home without realizing that they'd got some local teenage girl pregnant. So I think there were quite a few like illegitimate kids from that time. So yeah, no idea where the family tree went really. And
do you ever do one of those, like, you know how you could do the like ancestry swab things? You ever do one of those?
Yeah, I did. I years and years ago, 2004, I spoke at this amazing conference called Pop Tech in the US up in Maine, and there was a guy called Spencer Wells. I haven't spoken to him for years. He was probably Professor Spencer Wells, who was I was going to say genealogist. I don't know if that's correct, but his big thing was like ancestry and DNA. And he was talking to me about something before we were both speaking that day. And he's like, I bet you anything, like your grandfather's eyes were blue. And I was like, well, interesting. I have no idea because I don't know who he is. My dad was an orphan. Yeah. He's like, this is amazing. We're going to send you. So I got sent this DNA test like 2004, like before it became a big thing, before 23andMe was around.
Like normal.
So I did it. Yeah. So I did a test back then. And actually all the data then got ported across to 23andMe. So yeah, I'm aware I have like 48 cousins, like second, third removed, whatever. So I've never spent too much time kind of trying to figure that out,
going down that path.
Yeah. So, but my dad was a builder. He was a manual laborer. He was a bricklayer. That's what he did. He had no formal education. Orphan, grew up in a home, so pretty tough background for him. And my mum married. I think my mum was 19 when they married. She had me in her early 20s, and then they divorced. My mum remarried. She was married to my stepfather for about 10 years. That was pretty turbulent. And we kind of moved around a lot. Like I went to 6 different schools, maybe 7, lost count. And was just kind of exposed to these extraordinary, like opposite ends of the spectrum. So my dad, he was kind of in touch with me and my brother until I was about 10 or 11, and then he vanished. Like just nothing, no letters stopped. I eventually drove down there years later to like the last address that he had, and he wasn't there. They'd never heard of him, and like the trail went cold. I did track him down years and years later, but I'll come back to that bit of the story.
Yeah.
But so as kids, like when my dad was still around, so maybe I was like 9 or 10 years old, maybe we go and stay with him for the weekend, and he was renting like a room in a house in this city called Plymouth in the UK. And he was in this country and western band. They were terrible. So as kids, we'd like travel in his like rusty beat up car to some working men's club in the dockyard in this sort of coastal port town for his like Saturday nights. He's playing there with his band, and like Sunday morning we go to actually I don't know if this term exists in America. We'd call it a car boot sale, but I guess boot in the US is a trunk. So I don't know what you call that, but it's basically like people just gather in some giant parking lot or a field somewhere and just sell stuff that they've got.
Oh yeah,
and
we call it like a flea market here.
Flea market, yeah, that kind of. So we'd like Sunday morning, we go to a flea market with Dad, and he'd
Nice.
buy like, we look for like old Star Wars toys or Lego, or because he didn't have any money. And then, the next weekend or weekend after, we'd be back home with my stepdad, and he was working for a super wealthy family, and they would be like, "Oh, Ben, do you want to come and help? We're having a garden party. Do you want to come and help as a like waiter?" So,
Interesting.
and incredibly wealthy people. So I was kind of exposed to so much as a kid, and I'm really grateful for that. But it wasn't, it certainly wasn't like perfect childhood.
Right.
It was, there was a fair bit of turbulence and trauma and all that stuff. And
So when
I
for
was going
you
to say,
then? Oh yeah,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say, academically, I was not one of those kids that responded well to being told to sit down in a room, don't say anything for like an hour,
Yeah.
and remember what you're being told because it's important. That did not do it for me. I had to be like doing things, like engaging with stuff. So I didn't excel academically.
Yeah. It's interesting. I heard this story. I was maybe like 5, 10 years ago now. And it was about like this girl, and she was in, like elementary school, and she was like always like super out of control and like just doing things and moving, never like sitting still. And the teacher was like, you need to take your like daughter to the doctor. You need to get her on like Ritalin, like get her to chill the heck out. And they took her to the doctor, and the doctor took the girl, put her in a room, put music on, and left. And the girl just started dancing. And he was like, your daughter's not, like your daughter doesn't need Ritalin. She's just a dancer. She just wants to move her body. And this girl, I'm gonna forget her exact name, but she's the person that went on to create like the play Cats and like all these different shows on Broadway. And it's like, just because you learn to channel what someone else was like, that's misbehavior to.
So that story was the late Ken Robinson. I think Ken Robinson, extraordinary guy. So I was at TED. He gave an incredible TED talk about creativity, and it was like 2006. So I was there when he gave a talk, and blew me away because I'm definitely not a dancer, but I wasn't. I didn't respond well to that kind of traditional academic. Yeah.
So when then did kind of I want to be out, I want to do things, I want to like move my body. When did that sort of like click where it was like, all right, this is what I'm supposed to be doing? Because obviously it turned into your life. So like when did that first kind of like seed get planted, or that first really moment of like actually pursuing it?
Yeah, it's interesting looking back. Like, it's so hard to pinpoint that. I don't think there was like one moment where suddenly everything changed. But I love being outdoors as a kid. I was in the Scouts. I think for me, a fairly pivotal moment was kind of late teens. So I took in the UK we call it a gap year, like between kind of school and university. And
Smart.
So I took a year out. Obviously, I didn't get the exam results I was supposed to get. So I kind of took this year out, worked for a bit, saved some money, spent all the money, went traveling, went to Nepal, went to India, like spent some time in the Himalayas, like not like mountaineering, but just kind of trekking and living out of a backpack, and loved that. Came back. I then applied for a job up in Scotland, which then became like the second year out. And I'm 43 now. I'm still on my gap year. Like I never made it to higher education. So that second year after leaving school in my late teens, I worked up in Scotland for an extraordinary guy called John Ridgway, who was along with another Brit called Che Blythe, Chayblythe, Che Blythe. They were the first people to cross the Atlantic in a rowing boat, like back in 1966. So they rowed from Boston to Ireland, like 93 days. And they were both in the army at the time. They were both in the special forces, the SAS in the UK, and just extraordinary thing. And he came back after that, left the army, started at some point in the 70s what he called the John Ridgway School of Adventure, which was this kind of outward bound center on steroids. Like it was mostly corporate clients and team building, leadership development, communication skills. But right up on the Scottish Highlands, so in the mountains on the coast in this incredible part of the world. And I applied for a job. I was 18 as an instructor, and to my amazement, was offered this role as part of his team. So I spent the best part of a year up there in Scotland, working for him, with him. And I think that's where the screw came loose, for me, because
and you were instructing, like you were like the tour guy.
It's now looking back, it's insane. I was like 18, 19
no
years old.
experience, lead all these people. And
and the crazy thing is we'd get, teams of managers and leaders from his clients. And, in the kind of evening after they had their dinner, the instructors would come in and like debrief them on how they did, like literally assessing their leadership skills. And now, looking back, I'm like, man, that was insane for a teenager to be doing that. But it was, of course, you're standing there in front of this group next to John Ridgway, who's just a legendary character. So I think that experience was so pivotal for me. Not just because it enabled me to be outdoors the whole time in this amazing, pretty remote part of the world. Pretty challenging. It's mainland Britain, but it's right up on the northwest coast. Pretty rugged up there, but also it forced me way out of my comfort zone, standing up, speaking to groups of people. Of course, that's become a big part of how I make a living. But it's kind of scary stuff for a teenager. And to have this amazing role model and this amazing mentor there next to you, that was incredible. So I think that year, and I came away from that thinking, this is what I want to do with my life. Like, I want to do these amazing challenges, expeditions, but I want to use the experience for something more than just building a pedestal for myself and my own ego. And John was very, very good at that. He was a brilliant storyteller, a brilliant mentor to me and to the rest of the team. So, but I also assumed that I had to join the army because John had been in the army, and pretty much all of my like boyhood heroes had been in the service, in the forces somewhere. So
you did that for a year.
My army career was not illustrious. 11 months. I managed to kind of sweet talk my way into Sandhurst, which is like the UK version of West Point. So it's the Royal Military Academy. So that's to join as an officer. And they almost insist that you have a degree, which I didn't have. So I loved the challenge of trying to get in, because I was the underdog. I didn't have the qualifications. I didn't have the family connections. I was just like coming out of nowhere. But I'd spent this year with this guy, John Ridgway, and he had a pretty amazing reputation. So I loved the challenge of getting into that place. But I realized very quickly that once I was in and being trained as an officer, that I did not like following orders. I didn't respond well to that kind of authority where do this because we're telling you to do it, and don't question it because that's the way it's always been done. And if you do question it, you will be disciplined. Like that. So I left the army. I actually injured myself in a car crash, so I had this kind of good reason to leave. And
how long were you with the army?
11 months. That was it. Oh, so
okay.
Yeah.
And then so you were with John for a year. Army for 11 months. Yeah. Get injured and then leave.
Left. And then I think I went back to stay with my mum for a bit. She divorced my stepdad. She was like renting this tiny cottage. There really wasn't room for me to be there. And I think she probably thought I'd gone crazy. I had no money, no job, no qualifications. And I was talking about trying to do an expedition to the North Pole. So my poor mum. And that expedition happened not long after that. So I left the army in 1999. First expedition was 2001. So I kind of juggled part-time jobs. I qualified as a personal trainer. I was into fitness.
Tried a couple things.
Yeah. So first expedition was 2001.
And where did because you're with John, you're doing that. I mean, you said they were rowing, right? They were like in the water. They weren't necessarily, going across the Arctic.
Totally different thing. Yeah.
where did that seed get planted that it was like, that's the way that I'm going to explore and channel and like show the world really like what you can do as a human?
Very good question. So I think it was, even as a kid, I had this, I don't know where it came from, but just this fascination with in a way with kind of adventure, exploration, full stop. I loved reading about, hearing about, learning about mountaineers and people like John rowing oceans or sailing around the world. He sailed, did a lot of that as well. He could sail around the world 3 times. So I was just fascinated by those stories. And the more I started to read about it, the more I just became completely fascinated by polar exploration because it just seemed like the toughest thing you could do without leaving the atmosphere. It just seemed insane.
Yeah.
And we like for a tiny country in Britain, we have this peculiar history. You know, we produced Shackleton and Captain Scott, so two of these like iconic pioneers from just over a century ago. So as a school kid in the UK, like you still get taught that. They're still household. Scott and Shackleton in England, they're like household names still. So fascinated by that. And to me, it just seemed like I don't know, the most insane thing I could aspire to. And I never ever thought it would or could become a career. I just thought, well, maybe once in my life I could do one expedition, and wouldn't that be amazing? Like that was the extent of my ambition.
And so walk us then through your first expedition. So you're like, I'm doing this, I'm making it happen, and then kind of fill us in there because I know.
Yeah, so I contacted a guy called Penn with a P, Penn Haddow, who was he was kind of my polar mentor really, and he had
like
a bit of experience.
Actually your mentor, or through like videos,
so.
research?
So the first I got in touch with him. This was 99, 2000. Pretty much when I got my first email account. And like I registered my first domain name. I got bensouls.com in 99. Like that's how old I am. So but back then you'd get like 5 emails a week, and it was really exciting if you got an email. So I'm like emailing
you took advantage of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. in hindsight. Oh man. So emailed this guy and he was offering he was putting together a few trips, basically trying to sell places on these expeditions. And he was offering a trek to the magnetic North Pole, which is a very different place from the geographic pole, which is the one that I've been to. It's like just off the coast of Canada. It's still in the Arctic, but it's maybe a fortnight. And that to me, like 2 weeks on skis, kind of seemed like a really cool place to start. Yeah. So I contacted Penn, and he said, well, I tell you what, I've actually got a team of, I don't know, it's 5 or 6 who want to go from Russia to the geographic North Pole. So way longer journey, like 600 miles, probably 2 months on skis. He said, we're going to have a couple of like airdrops of food and supplies en route. So it won't be too hard, won't be dragging tons of weight. And all you've got to do, we'd love to have on board. I mean, I'm compressing the story here because I spent some time with him. We went out like hiking in the UK. He figured out that I was, I was
qualified
fit and capable of quality. Exactly. Yeah. So, he basically offered me a chance to join his team. I think I had to raise like 30 or 40,000 pounds. I was thinking like
a good amount.
How am I have no money. How do I do this? And anyway, long story short, the team for some reason like vaporized. I think a sponsor went bust or something. So Penn got back in touch. He's like, I basically paid deposits with the like Russian helicopters and things. So I'm not going to see that money back. So how about you and I do it, just the two of us? Like you'll be 23, you'll be the youngest in history. We'll be the first British team. It'll be awesome. All you've got to do is raise like another whatever 20,000 pounds or something. So I was like, awesome, but like And so that's kind of how it happened. And he's like, if we don't have the airdrops of food and everything, that makes it cheaper. But obviously we've got to drag everything at the start, like 350 pounds or something. So that was how it all happened. And that whole period, like trying to train for it, trying to prepare, trying to raise money. I had no idea how to raise money I'd never done that before. I'd always, all of my heroes had their like sponsor logos on their jacket, on their hat. So my entire pitch was based around, for X £1,000, you can have your logo on my jacket. The first meeting I had with a potential sponsor, it was actually a company my mum works for. So I think the CEO there kind of took pity on me. And I went in there with I printed out my little proposal and explained that Penn, Haddow, and I were going to be walking from the north coast of Siberia to the North Pole. You're walking over the sea, walking over the frozen surface of the Arctic Ocean. So it's going to take about 600 miles, give or take, about 2 months. The Arctic Ocean is 5.4 million square miles. It's bigger than the United States. Completely deserted. And, and we'd love it. I'd love your logo on my jacket. And he basically said, "Who the hell is going to see our logo? Like, if you're in this
there's no one out there."
So I was like, that's a good point. Oh god. So the sponsorship in so many ways has been almost a bigger challenge than the expeditions, because these are
Huh.
expensive camping trips. I remember with that project, I had to raise tens of thousands, and I thought that was just, I couldn't even get my head around that. Fast forward to 2013, I raised and spent 1.8 million pounds, $2.5 million in sponsorship. So everything scaled eventually, but back
Yeah.
then, in those early days, that was one of the biggest stumbling blocks. Anyway, I raised just about enough money to do this. We set off on a shoestring budget, dropped off, long journey out through Russia. I mean, several days of travel and mayhem, and finally dropped by helicopter day one of this trip. And I remember kind of getting out, like putting my skis on and the sledge harness and like starting and just feeling so far out of my depth. I thought I was 23. I was pretty fit. I thought I was hard. I thought I knew what I was letting
Yeah.
myself in for. And
Yeah.
oh man, talk about humbling experience. Just alien level of fear and difficulty, and just a different universe. It was
Yeah. Just
negative. It was
nothingness
minus,
everywhere.
yeah, and minus 48 degrees centigrade. So that's like negative 50 something Fahrenheit the day we started, and that's ambient air temperature. That's before wind chill. So, and there are polar
Goodness.
bears. You see polar bear footprints in the ice. Oh, and you're walking over the sea, and oh look, it's cracking up and melting. So
Jesus.
and again, long story short, we did not make it to the North Pole. We got 2/3 of the way there, 2 months, ran out of time, basically airlifted out back to Russia, back home. No zero press or recognition or anything, because we didn't have any budget for PR, and also we hadn't achieved the goal. And I was just shattered, like absolutely burnt out. And then, I don't know, a week or two after I got home, I was staying with my mum again, and I got a letter, and it was basically an invoice for my half of the remaining costs, because we'd gone over our budget. And so I remember opening this letter, and it was a bill for £34,615, so probably about $50,000. And I had no money, no job, no degree, nothing. My mum she'd divorced her stepdad. She was like renting this tiny cottage, like she didn't have any money. So I was thinking, like, oh wow, like how am I going to fix this? I think by that point I was maybe like working in the village pub, like literally behind the bar and washing up and stuff, and just trying to figure out what I was going to do in my life. And at some stage I was like, maybe if I do another expedition like next year, there's only one season each year, one time each year, like maybe I can roll this into the budget, just raise more sponsorship, and then just pay off the debt. So of my 12 expeditions in 20 years, like the first two were this kind of Ponzi scheme, where I dug myself into such a deep hole on that first expedition that the only way out was through,
to do another one.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how it happened. Now, I'm certainly not advocating that you should get into a ton of debt and through a near-death experience, but there is real power in commitment. And what's the saying? If you want to conquer the island, you have to burn your boat.
Yeah.
And for me, I was in real trouble at that point, and nobody was going to help me, because nobody could help me. Nobody around me had that kind of money.
Yeah. Here's 50 grand.
Yeah. Literally, it just
happening.
wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't happening. So I had to figure it out, and I kind of, and maybe I'm being flippant about it now, it was deeply stressful at the time, but I
can imagine.
I don't regret that experience for a second. And then it kind of happened, and there was an expedition in 2003, big one 2004, and then I was on a roll, and I sort of at some stage stumbled into speaking about it, because it wasn't like I did my first experience thinking, great, I'm going to come home and get on the speaking circuit, because I didn't.
Here I am.
I didn't realize. I didn't realize it existed. I didn't realize people got paid to talk. It just wasn't even on my radar. And even if it had been, I was pretty shy as a kid, as a teenager. If you told me age 17, 18, that I would be standing up in front of my record audience, live audience it was in Russia. It was this crazy event in an ice hockey stadium. So they lost count after like 8,500. So several thousand people. And I was on stage for an hour and a half because they had a translator. If you told me that I'd be doing that kind of thing, I would have said that sounds like my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's I
That's
think
how it
it's
started.
crazy too. Like I've had a similar experience where it's like I grew up kind of like the shy, quiet kid who's like, I will die before I get in front of like a room and speak. But it's like when you really do care about something so much and you're like so passionate or your heart's into something, it's like
Yeah.
this kind of weird sense of like it like screw the fear, whatever. Like this is what
Yeah.
I need to do in my soul.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think like if we kind of go back into just you kicking out this journey, I think two things that are just like beautiful that I think anybody else could take from that too is it's like one, looking at I want to become a polar explorer. I want to start doing these expeditions. This guy does it. Let me send him an email. Like
Absolutely. And I say that, you know, and I get now, there's so many, you know, emails, messages, DMs, or people asking for advice, and it wasn't just pen. You know, I wrote. There's a British, famous British explorer called Sir Ranulph Fiennes, legendary in the UK, like legendary character. He's written a lot of books, done a load of expeditions, and I read one of his books about a project he did in Antarctica in the '90s, early '90s, and I was so inspired. This was before my first expedition. I was like, I want to write to this dude, and but I didn't know where to write, so I just literally in the front of the book, there's an address for the publisher, so I just sent it there. With like a cover note, I'd probably even put like a little, you know, envelope with a stamp on it, if you know, and sent it off, thinking, well, it'll probably just go in the trash. You know, really, it's, you know, this guy's like a legendary character in the UK, and I don't know what it was. 4 weeks later, I got. I'm gonna have a. I think I have it here. Hang on a second, because I have like a file of, it just says expedition mementos, but I still have it filed away somewhere. But I got this handwritten letter back
from him.
Here it is. And like pages, like 2 pages of advice. So from my hero, who I'd never met. And and I was 19, I guess, at the time. Yeah. And that was just a long shot. You know, I didn't even know where to send it. So I just sent it to the publisher. Yeah. So and pretty much everyone else I approached got back to me. So that was a really interesting lesson. Right. And when people reach out to me, especially young people, I always like congratulate them. I'm like, well done for taking a risk and taking a long shot. Yeah. In some ways, it's so much easier. Yeah, but it's so much easier these days to get in touch with almost anyone. But the flip side of that is people that have done interesting stuff tend to be swamped by incoming mail. So but yeah, big lesson. The power of asking questions, like not being afraid to ask a question, not being afraid to say, look, I'm totally new to this, so I don't know where to start, but like, and also ask the right questions. You know, I tend to get a whole range of stuff, and often some like super naive, you know, like, oh, I've just done, you know, run my first 5K and I want to go solo to the North Pole next year. How do I raise sponsorship? I'm like, well, dude, like, do a bit more work. Like come back, ask me some more specific questions. But I'm not gonna give you this on the plate, because the value for me, looking back, was having to figure this out. You know, and trip, asking the right questions. Learn. Exactly. Yeah.
And so I think the second thing too, kind of in that first expedition, was it's like also not letting a big barrier to entry stop you, right? Where it's like, and he's like, all right, you want to come on this expedition, 30,000 pounds or like $30,000, whatever it was. It's like, again, 99% of people probably go, oh, well, you know, there's no way that's going to happen. But it was like, no, like, I want to do this. I'm committed to this. Like you said, things happen when you're committed. And it turned into like the trajectory of your life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I have. You can't see it's behind you, but on the wall behind my monitor by my desk is a photo taken out of a helicopter. Pretty much the same place that Penn and I started from in 2001. So I went back there in 2004, but on my own this time. So that's when I did get to the North Pole on my own. 72 days. I was 26, and the photo is actually of another helicopter, because we had two, you know, flying in tandem, really for safety reasons, because there's no one out there, middle of nowhere. And a friend of mine, amazing photographer, came with me to the start line, just to document it all. And I have it on my wall, not so much to like congratulate myself, but as a reminder that I was 26 when I figured that out. Like, those 2 helicopters are there because of me, because of this idea I had and the money I raised and the team I put together. And not only that, but I was then dropped off. I spent 10 weeks on my own, like surviving, navigating through, operating in one of the most challenging environments on the planet, and then was picked up by a ski plane on the Canadian side of the Arctic Ocean, like flew back to Canada, down to Ottawa, like back home again 4 months later, and back to my mum's house for tea and cake. And like, to me, that's there as like a reminder to self, like whatever you're finding challenging now, if the 26-year-old, like Ben, if the 26-year-old you could figure that out, you can probably figure this out.
For real.
So, yeah.
So let me ask this then. So now 12 expeditions, you've been to all like craziest, like your longest one being 1,800 miles. Like I was calculating it earlier and I was like, how far? And so I'm in Southern California, Northern California. When I drive up there, it's 500 miles. So it's basically doing there, and back on foot while pulling 400 pounds behind you of your food.
Yeah,
so like
440 pounds at the start. Yeah.
Which is just like unfathomable. So one thing I would be curious is, like, from all these different expeditions you've done, and I know we could be here for hours talking about like really in depth, but I'd be curious, like from doing all of those, has there been like a silver lining, like lesson or takeaway or something that is just like a constant reminder to you from doing all of those? Like, what's one of the biggest lessons you've taken from all those?
Yeah, gosh, I think there's so many, but if I had to pick one, it would be that big 1,800-mile expedition, finishing that. So it was February 2014. I should work out. I don't know what it was, 36 or something. And this was the culmination of not only 108 days of really, really hard work with an incredible teammate who took us on that expedition. We'd achieved something a lot of experts thought was impossible. I still hold the world record for the longest ever polar journey on foot. It's in our downstairs bathroom. That's the only place my wife lets me keep polar stuff. So it's on the wall in there. So
casual, the 5 people before you that did that, they died.
Yeah. Five people died trying, but that was like nearly a century ago. So this is one of the last big unfinished journeys in the polar regions. And it kind of, not it's not an exaggeration to say like 4-minute mile kind of territory. We genuinely raised the bar. And this was not just 3.5 months of really hard work training in the States, but more than a decade of work, like building up to this project, like 10 expeditions, each one was a stepping stone again. By that stage, I had a team, I had 12 people working for me. I mentioned the budget, like that expedition alone, about $2.5 million that I had to raise from scratch. Had to find sponsorship, those sums of money, you need lawyers. So this huge, I'd inadvertently become the CEO of this crazy business with 12 people in an office in London. But I was also the product. I was the thing that we were delivering, for our partners. So crazy period. But anyway, the very last day of that, you can imagine absolutely exhausted, like getting back to the coast. We went from the coast to the South Pole, back to the coast again. So getting back to the coast, and there was a definite finish line because you literally you finish on an island, confusingly, but it's all sea ice. So you step from the ice onto the land again, and that's the finish line. So there's this definite finish line. And I remember making sure my teammate Tark and I were like together. We took our skis off and that we'd step over at like exactly the same time, finish the exact. And I remember for years imagining that was going to be the most emotional moment of my entire life. Achieving the biggest goal I ever set myself. I put my foot on the land. Nothing happened. There was no like immediate feeling of elation or triumph or there was maybe this kind of vague relief that we didn't have to drag a sledge any further. We were safe, finished, done. But there was no like party time kind of celebration. And then rather than my life becoming more awesome, it actually got a lot less awesome for months and months after that moment. And for 2 reasons. I mean, firstly, I was exhausted, like mentally, physically, emotionally. absolutely burnt
Drained.
out, completely shattered. Like it took physically, I worked with an amazing doctor kind of recovering from that trip physically. And it took 9 months to be healthy again. You know, we'd properly screwed. I lost just over 50 pounds in 3.5 months. And we're eating 6,000 calories a day. So it's incredible stress on, you know, physiologically. But beyond that, beyond the exhaustion, the goal, you know, this dream that had been giving me all of this energy, all of this determination, all of this drive and work ethic and, you know, ambition. As soon as we achieved it, it vanished. And there was nothing there to replace it because the goal was so big that it took all of my bandwidth, all my time, all my energy. So it was, weird few months after that trip. And eventually I started to realize that I perhaps made a mistake in that in viewing success as a finish line in the future, as this kind of threshold where if I, like, things aren't great now, but when I get there, they're going to be awesome. And if I could only work hard enough and achieve enough of something or accumulate enough of something else, one day I'll get there, and then things will be great. And then I got there. You know, it was literally this finish line. This is it. Ben, you have achieved the biggest thing you've ever dared to achieve. Everyone said it's impossible. You're never going to do it. All this money, all this effort. No one's ever gone that far. You're going to die. Everything else, and we did it. And it was kind of disappointing. This probably sounds like the most demotivational thing I could be telling anyone. You know, I aimed as high as I could in my field, and that's a pretty difficult field. Worked my butt off, brilliant team, amazing sponsors, did it, and it was kind of disappointing. Where am I going with this? I think the biggest lesson was, before that journey, before that achievement, if you'd asked me to define success, I would have said achieving your goal, obviously. Ask me now to define success. To me, it looks more like continuing to strive well. Like success is not a destination. It's not a finish line. And I think also for businesses, like you're not trying to get to a point where everything stops. Like that's not the point. You're trying to keep going, trying to keep something that will, try to create something that will outlast you as a founder. So that was a big lesson. Success is not a finish line. It's the journey.
Right. Because it's like, and I've had, I want to say a similar experience, but did not do anything nearly as difficult as that. But it's similar in the sense of like, when I get there, I'm going to be this. And one of the most beautiful lessons I got throughout that process was like, when you get there, and we talk about this on the podcast, this amount, it's like, well, who's the person that decides that you're going to feel that way when you get to that moment?
Absolutely.
And it's you. So it's like,
absolutely,
why not decide to have that feeling now and achieve the thing you want, so that you're not getting there to achieve it, to achieve that. It's like, you're not achieving to be happy, you're happily achieving.
Absolutely.
Sort of thing. And I just have a few more questions for you, and I know we could be here forever, but one of the things that I was extremely excited to ask you about is, and like this happens with a lot of Olympic athletes, is they go to the Olympics, they go after this major goal, and it's like shocking that a lot of Olympic athletes come back and they go into depression, because it's like you have this massive thing, you're going for it, and whether you achieve it or not, you come back and it's like, it's same for astronauts. Like, I just went to the moon. Like, if I just did that, like, what the heck am I supposed to do next?
Nothing else is going to compare.
Right. And so there's this moment of like almost losing your purpose, your sense of who you are. And it kind of, I know you said a little bit that it kind of started to go more downhill than uphill, but I'm curious, like, how did you go from achieving this unbelievable thing? Everybody said it was impossible. You achieve it. You crush this huge goal you've had for a decade, a dream for more than a decade. You kind of go into this place, it sounds like, of, like, you kind of go in this place of like lostness and like, what the heck's next?
Like, I think I was genuinely depressed. I remember talking to someone who was like, dude, it sounds like you have PTSD. And I was like, well, that's ridiculous. Nobody's shooting at us. But of course, it was a pretty stressful experience. Like, if you told any physical training coach, I'm planning to do between 9 and 11 hours of exercise every day for 7 days a week for about 3.5 months. And probably not going to sleep enough because it's 24-hour daylight where I'm going. And so I'm going to sleep about 4.5, 5 hours a
Insane.
night. We'll take 0 rest days, except when the weather's so bad that we can't move, which means that's not very relaxing. And you're pretty terrified because there's a storm going on. They would have said you're insane, So yeah, I was in a pretty low place when I came back, and of course, I knew that was probably going to happen. I'd seen it happen. I say like Olympic athletes and world champions and everything else, but it still happened, of course.
Yeah.
And
When was the moment that it was like, I got my meanness back? Like Ben is here. I'm like, I got that drive, that fuel, that like, do you remember, was there like a moment or something that happened that was like,
I think it was through a very, very dear friend of mine who, her family have a house, have a second home in South Africa. So they go down there for like Christmas, New Year. And she was like, Ben, we're heading down there. It's going to be obviously Southern Hemisphere. So it's summer. We're going there for a couple of weeks. Why don't you come with us? If you can, if you've got some MRs or whatever, come and join us. So I had this amazing fortnight in the sun in this beautiful house near Cape Town, by the pool. And I took my bike. I was, at the time, I was still, I still like ride my bike occasionally, but I was quite keen cyclist for many years. So I took my bike, which is a huge hassle, like packing a road bike into a case and flying it half across the world. But I had my bike with me. And at some point after, I don't know what it was, 4, 5, 6 days of just like lying in the sun, reading a book, not looking at my phone, not looking at emails, just properly time out, relaxing. I was like, might go for a bike ride. And that was the moment, I think, where I was like, okay, right, I'm choosing to go and do some difficult physical challenge. And I went out for 2 or 3 hours on my bike. So it was that moment. But that was as clearly that was a direct result of taking proper time out, which I still struggle to do now. But big lesson.
Right. To like give yourself some quiet moments and like take a deep breath. Yeah. And it's I was just talking to someone yesterday about like kind of how COVID was almost a forced one of those, where it was like, all right, everybody needs to like chill and take a moment and say like, am I actually doing what I want to do and what I feel like I'm supposed to be doing? And obviously COVID happened and you couldn't do anything about it, but it's important to like take moments in your life where you say, like, even like you did, where it's like, if you're like, for the next weekend, I'm just gonna just put my phone away, like chill, relax, go, or even do like and this may freak some people out, but like go do a trip by yourself, like book a hotel where you go to somewhere that you've wanted to go to and just be by yourself, because it's it's interesting what can happen when you sit with your thoughts for a little bit.
I totally agree. That I had 2012, 2013, like building up to that big expedition at Antarctica. And I had a really good team working with me, and they must have thought I was getting like close to burnout. It was just crazy. The just arranging everything and training really hard. Yeah. And they literally, they're like, dude, we booked a hotel on the business account, but we booked this hotel. You're going away for a week. And they just sent me off to the Mediterranean, to Mallorca, this island. The Mediterranean, in a hotel. It wasn't training or anything. It wasn't in the Arctic. Great. First time I'd been in a hotel on my own ever. Like that was out of my comfort zone, but essential looking back.
Yeah. Epic. Well, Ben, it has been beyond an honor to have you here, man. I know we could go for hours. You've lived such a beautiful life. If people want to get more, absolutely, man. And if people want to get more info on you, see what you're up to, like where's the best place for people to find you, see what you're up to?
Yeah, good question. So my website, probably the best place to start, bensaunders.com, even though I can't forget that. And then I am kind of Instagram, Twitter, I'm pretty active on both of those. I am Polar Ben, all one word, Polar Ben.
Very nice.
So yeah, if you have any questions, hit me up and I'll do my best.
Awesome. And so before we run, one last question for you. I ask this to every guest because we're all about helping people find direction, but we want to do it through some sort of like moving the ball forward. And so what I would be curious is like, what is one thing you could tell someone listening to this to do in the next 24 to 48 hours to start finding direction in their life?
Ooh, gosh.
And it can be to give you thinking time. It can be, you know, for the next couple months. It could be for the next 6 months, the next year. It's not like do this to find direction for the rest of your life. But even just like if someone's listening to this and they're going, man, I'm just feeling stuck and like I don't know what's next. What's something that can kind of get them in the right direction?
Yeah, good question. So, gosh, I'm a big fan of obviously of planning. I've done these really pretty complex expeditions. But even rewinding back to that, I still have lists that I wrote 20 years ago of dreams. Like these are the goals. These are the things I want to do. And it's mad looking back now how so many of them happened. But also some of the things that I thought were so wildly ambitious back then, I've gone on to do way more than I dreamt was possible. So I would say, like, if you're feeling stuck, block out some time, like close the laptop, like get away, find a quiet space in a few hours and do it on a computer or phone if that works for you. If not, like big pad of paper, but just start writing, just create lists, like ambitions, like don't limit yourself. Just because half the stuff I wrote 20 years ago sounded ludicrous. I remember my stepfather telling me when I came back from that expedition, 2001, in a load of debt, basically kind of giving me this talking to you, saying, "Well, I told you it was a stupid thing to do. Whoever heard of anyone making a living out of polar expeditions? This is just like the sooner you get this nonsense out of your system, the better. Like just get a sensible job." And of course, I ignored that. And and I bought a beautiful house in the countryside in the UK. Life is awesome. I had a midlife crisis a couple of years ago. I had a Porsche 911 GT3, like race car. Like that was all this stuff. All this stuff. Every brick in this house, like, came through this dream that I had and the work that I've done. So don't limit yourself. I think you're going away and just getting stuff on paper, like starting to make a plan. Don't limit yourself and don't let other people limit you either. Like the word impossible is just someone else's opinion. Like, but very rarely is it fact. So if you're feeling stuck, just like take some time out, just get planning, like think about what your dream life looks like. And then get after it.
Love it, man. Well, Ben, again, man, thank you so much for being here, man.
Real pleasure.
Your life is beyond fascinating. Again, make sure you go to Ben's website if you want to check him out on YouTube. Loads of good stuff that'll just blow your mind. But Ben, thank you so much for being here, man.
Real
Massively appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and enjoy the beautiful weather out in the UK.
Yeah, will do. You can see I'm looking a bit sunburnt. I've definitely gone pinko during our call, so I need to put a hat on, and if I go back inside it. Stu, thank you, and great to speak. Take care, buddy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben.